I'm Amy from Small Garden News, and I'm making a little video today about setting up a worm bin for vermicomposting at home. It's a lot of fun. It helps recycle nutrients from your kitchen scraps into usable compost that you can use in your garden or your container plants. So it's a really great thing to do, easy, takes up very little room in your home, and it surprisingly does not smell bad at all. It smells just like compost. So the things you're going to need to set up your own worm bin are 5 things. You'll need the worms, of course, some kind of container to use for your bin. You'll need some bedding material, and you'll need, of course, kitchen vegetable-y scraps, fruit scraps, peels, and you'll need a little bit of grit, either dirt or fine sand. And I'm going to talk about each one of those 5 things in turn. And I'm going to start with the worms, because understanding the worms helps you understand everything else about how the process is going to work and how to set up your bin in a way to get really good compost. So the worms are not the same worms that you see in your garden when you're digging down to plant a shrub or plant other kind of perennials, or you're turning your soil for some reason in the garden and you turn over those big worms. Those are tunneling worms, burrowing worms, and those do good work, excellent work in your garden, opening up air spaces so that water can go through, so that roots can go through, and they do leave behind valuable nutrients in their little tunnels that help your garden. But those are not the most efficient worms at turning organic material into compost. The most efficient kind of worms, the worms that we use in a bin like this one, are going to be red wiggler worms. And those are worms that live normally out in nature near the surface. They live in leaf litter, in the forest floor where leaves fall down and collect, or they live where in fields where plants have fallen and they're decaying on the ground. They live in cow patties out in pastures. So they live and work near the surface of the soil, not right on top, because worms don't like the light, but they stay near the top. And so when you're making a bin, this is where it becomes important, you need a shallow bin. The worms don't dive down deep, and so a shallow bin like this one that's only about 7-8 inches deep and wide, instead of one that's narrow and tall, like if you had a 5-gallon bucket, you would be using a bin that was wasting a lot of space, because the worms are not going to dive down deep. That's not their nature. They live near the top. So anything that's down deep is really kind of out of their realm of experience and expertise. So the bin needs to be solid in a way that doesn't let light through. This one excludes light very well, and that's very helpful for the worms. If all you have at your home is a clear plastic container to use, then it would be good to paint it completely with something that will block all the light, coat it in some way. Otherwise the worms will kind of cluster in the middle in a tight little ball to stay away from the light. And that way, then they wouldn't be using the whole space and making as much good compost for you. So dark is good. My bin has holes around the edges. You can see those there about 4 inches apart. And there are holes on the bottom too. I don't know if you can see them very well. There's 3 here, 1 in the middle, 3, and another 1 here. You can have, if you have a bigger bin, of course you'll need more holes. And so the holes on the bottom are important, because worm composting it somehow creates a lot of water. It's a very wet business. Part of that is that the kitchen vegetable scraps you're going to feed them have a lot of moisture inside. But if that moisture was allowed to collect, over time, it would raise up water inside the bin, and you'd end up drowning your worms, which would be counterproductive. That would not help your worm composting at all. So the holes in the bottom allow that leachate to go out the bottom, which is why my bin sits in a plastic tray. And if I just had those holes, you know, and sit in anywhere, like the leachate would all come out and I have to mop it up, and that would like make a mess for starters. And then it would also waste nutrients, because there are valuable nutrients that your plants could have been using in that water that leaks out. And so if it's in this plastic tray, then I can go pour it on my plants. So it gets used up in a much more appropriate way. And so the holes here at the top are air holes. Because even though, you know, the worms live in the soil, they live near the top, right? And they, like us, because they're living creatures, they take in oxygen and they release carbon dioxide. They don't use lungs, but they still have the same needs for releasing the carbon dioxide and taking in oxygen. So if there aren't good air holes around the top of around your bin, you know, I put mine near the top so that stuff doesn't fall out. If you don't have good air holes, there's a chance that carbon dioxide could build up in there. It's not a huge chance, but I like to, you know, be safe. And just like people, like if we don't get enough oxygen and we have too much carbon dioxide, like we do not do very well, right? And other living things are the same. They need that oxygen. And it's not just the worms. There's a whole community that will develop inside of your bin. That's the worms, it's bacteria, it's fungi, different kinds. It's, I found snails in my bin. I have no idea where they came from. And all kinds of other things will start to live in there. It's really cool. But they need the air, so that's important. So also, if you're starting a new bin, you'll need to put some bedding in here. 6 inches deep to start would be awesome. And the bedding material that most of us use is just loopy strips of paper. This is newspaper. It doesn't have to be newspaper, but it does need to be wet. Like this is dry, because that's easier to tear up when it's dry. But I put it in a bowl of water and, you know, squeeze it out so it's not soaking wet. But you can see it's damp, but it's still loopy. It's still lots of air spaces for the worms to move through. Because remember, when plants material like leaves fall to the ground, or, you know, plants fall over, they don't pack down tight. They stay loose for a pretty long time, you know, until eventually, as they're breaking down, then they pack down. So if you have another source of paper, like you have a shredder at home that you put documents through, you can use those long loopy bits. Also, that white paper is fine for your worms, and that will be, you know, an easy source of bedding material for your bin if that's what you're going to use. And the wet part is important. The wet part is important because worms actually, because they don't have lungs, they breathe through their skin, but they need that moisture to allow for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Just like our lungs are damp inside, you know, the outside of their skin needs to be damp too for them to do the best that they can. So the other thing they're going to need, some kind of food, and this is scrappy stuff from the kitchen, right? A chunk of the end of a lettuce, kind of a slimy bit of pepper, just the stemmy bit, apple peels, coffee filters and coffee grounds, tea bags, celery ends, onion wrappers, all that kind of stuff. These are the kind of things that worms eat. Smells kind of funky, so I'm going to move it. But they don't eat everything from your kitchen. So things that do not decompose well, just like you wouldn't necessarily put them in your outdoor compost, or you'd be careful about putting them in your outdoor compost, you want to be careful about them in your worm bin too. So like meat scraps and grease. Those are very slow to decompose. And sometimes, before the worms can do their magic, instead of, you know, turning into worm compost, they start to smell bad, like dead things. And nobody really wants that in their home, or even outside their home. And they can also attract pests, because there are animals, you know, mammals, small mammals, that are attracted to the smell of dead things. It smells like food to them. So in order to not attract those, you can leave that stuff out of your bin. Other things that don't decompose well are citrus peels like lemon and lime and orange and grapefruit peels. If you put those in your bin, they will be here forever. They won't necessarily smell bad, but they will just be here forever, and you won't get your worm compost in a timely manner and will be annoying. So leave those out of your bin. Other things to leave out would be thick peels or of potato that might resprout, because they do that, or like the tops of carrots or other root vegetables, that leafy top, because I don't know if you've ever run a lot of experiments with carrot tops, you know, because I'm a mom, I've done all kind of weird things. You know that even in the dark, those tops will try to resprout, and so they won't be beautiful and green and look like a little forest, but it will be like a weird yellow blanched leafy bits all growing in there, and they will not feed your worms. They'll just make a mess inside your bin. So if you're going to use those kind of tops in your bin as part of your scraps, you know, chop them up good before you put them in, so that they don't have enough energy to regrow from. Another thing that you would want to not put in your bin is anything with salt already on it, like prepared food, like the old bowl of vegetables that were cooked that you found and forgot that had been way in the back of your fridge, and it's got, you know, fuzz on the top. It's all weird. You know, don't feed that to your worms if you ever put salt on it, because salt is not good for worms either. You know, think about, you know, how you kill leeches with salt. You know, not a good thing for your worms. So avoid that at all costs, you know, if you want to have a healthy bin. So that's the food. The other thing that you will need to put in here is a handful of some kind of grit. Garden soil or fine sand, because worms don't have teeth, and the grit helps the worms. And you might ask, if they don't have teeth, how are they eating all this wonderful food? Well, they use, instead of teeth, they rely on the bacteria and fungi that are inside of your bin to start turning all of this stuff to mush. You know how that happens. You know, it gets old, it gets disgusting, slimy, weird. Like, people don't want to eat it, but that is like gourmet food for the worms. They love that slimy, mushy stuff. So they can nip off the slime even though they don't have teeth. And inside, near the beginning of their gut, they have some of that grit that they have already ingested. And as they move, that grit helps grind up that slimy bit even more. And then the bacteria further down in their guts, you know, helps break it down even more. And as it exits the worm, it's worm compost. It's beautiful compost. And you can't tell what it was to start with. And so that's important to know, that the bacteria and fungi in here are your friends, and definitely the friends of your worms. So this is, you know, my bin. It's kind of a mess because I keep turning it over, but that's okay. I don't normally mess with it that much. But there's a lot of worm action going on down here. A lot of worm action. Let's see if I can, you know, I just harvested this bin a couple days ago. So, you know, I always lose worms when I do that. So it's not as big of a population, but there's a lot of compost already developed down in here. Oh, here's a little guy. He's hanging on. He's not going to come out. Come on. Ah! He slipped right out of my hands. That is so weird. Okay, so you can see, like, I have worms. And they're not very big. Those are red wigglers. And those are the guys that are doing all my work. So I harvested this bin a couple of weeks ago, and basically it was full of compost, which is why I lost some worms. This is the compost that I got out of this bin. You can see, like, there's some scraps of paper and a little bit of eggshell, but most of it just looks like uniformly brown muck, right? This stuff, though, I have plans for this. It's glorious. So I live in the southeastern part of the United States, and the soil we have here, like my yard, is red clay. Other people have gray clay. and still more, you know, have sand. But there's no topsoil. There's no, it's not like the Midwest where you've got feet and feet and feet of topsoil. We got nothing. And so in order for a garden to do really well, you need to add organic-y, composty stuff to help break up that clay, help make it looser for plant roots to go through. And it also helps in sand to have compost in your soil to hold the water better. But also, like this worm compost has all the nutrients that were originally in this stuff. And it has beneficial bacteria that help your plant roots use those nutrients more efficiently. So it's pretty glorious. I have a place already in mind to use this worm compost with other compost from my yard outside, my compost outside, and but this stuff is pretty magical. So I'm hoping that some of what I've said here today is helpful. If you have questions, you can go to my website and send me an email. Go to smallgardennews.com and go to the contact page and send me a note from the contact page, and I will try to answer all the questions that you might have. I'd be happy to. In fact, if I get enough questions, I can put together a fact sheet for y'all, for anybody to download. But this is the bin, and I hope you have fun with your own worms at home. And thank you for watching. Bye.